welcome to FO Podcasts. With me is Flavius Mihaies. He's back to talk about New Caledonia. He will make sense of trouble in New Caledonia. So Flavius, tell us, what is this new trouble in New Caledonia?
Thank you, Atul. It's good to be back. Well, for those who follow the news lately, they have seen and heard that New Caledonia is currently experiencing significant political unrest.
A lot of people who follow the news have not read about New Caledonia, especially in the US. Yeah, they've been busy following Donald Trump or Narendra Modi. Both countries are rather distracted. So tell everyone, where is New Caledonia? What exactly is this place? What is the trouble? Paint us a picture. Give us the context.
On the news, you might not need to feel bad because even the French doesn't really register with the French in France what's going on in New Caledonia. It's kind of at arm's length, the same way the Ukraine war is. People are not really so concerned or even care, I can say, for many of them about what's going on in New Caledonia. So you're not the only one in that group. But yeah, the New Caledonia is a French overseas territory in the Pacific. The population is a bit above 250,000, 271 and something.
Where exactly in the Pacific? That's the world's biggest ocean. So
right,
our listeners give them an idea as to where in the Pacific it is. Why is it so important? How have the French come to control it?
Right. No, it is strategically, you can say, located. It has bigger neighbors around it. Australia is the big power. New Zealand is also not far.
It's north of Australia and New Zealand.
Right, exactly. And then
east.
Exactly. So it has these bigger brothers, not brothers, but bigger neighbors around.
They're not exactly neighbors. They are still a few days of sailing away, and even if it's a ship, it's not that you reach Australia in 2 hours. You've still got to get on a boat or on a plane and get there.
You're right. It's not Taiwan and mainland China here. Absolutely. It is relatively close compared with the size of the Pacific Ocean, right? And if you look at the other side, which the Asian American continent is much further. So it's closer to Australia, relatively close to Australia and New Zealand.
Perfect. How did the French get to own it? Australia, of course, is taken over by the British and so was New Zealand. How did the French get to...
It was colonized in the second half of the 19th century and had become famous or infamous for its convicts population. The French would send their convicts there.
Just like Australia.
Just like Australia, exactly. We called it le bagne in French. And more recently, it has become an important economic asset for France as it holds 10% of the world nickel resources.
So nickel is the great prize for which the French control Caledonia. And because you need nickel in batteries, all electric vehicles, all sorts of storage of electricity needs nickel. Therefore, New Caledonia is strategic.
It is the population living, depending on, in large part, on the income from the nickel is also subject to the volatility of the market. And that those shifts in price can have dramatic impact on people's jobs and economic resources. And indeed, the island is economically largely dependent on nickel. A bit on tourism, and the rest, around 10%, is French financial support.
So why is there trouble? What's going on? I mean, one would have thought they would be all happy, clappy, living the island life in the Pacific, eating great sushi. What's the problem? What's going on?
Well, it's not this current crisis is not the first one, and due to the increase into the main indigenous group in New Caledonia called the Kanaks, their population increased in large numbers in the 80s, in the 70s, 80s, and that fueled a claim for larger autonomy and even independence.
What was their population a while ago? What is their population now?
So the population increased to the level of 50-60% of the population of the island within the 70s, 80s. And then it's actually stagnated, lowered between 2009 and 2014, and increased a little up to 40% from 30 to 41% today of the last
40% of the population.
41% of the population.
The island.
Of the island. And the rest of the population are of European descent.
Descendants of French convicts.
Or French convicts and French, business and other...
sailors who retired there from the French Navy.
Some from the region.
Mm-hmm. So there has been immigration.
From Vietnam. Exactly.
From Cambodia.
Right.
Maybe not Taiwan and Hong Kong. They probably go to Australia.
Right.
But Vietnam and Cambodia, the former French colonies, they've come to New Caledonia.
Exactly. And the Europeans are about the European descendants are about 30%. No, they actually decreased a little bit.
71%. So indigenous 41%, and Europeans are 30%. So we get 27%.
Right, and the rest are either métis, so coming from different ethnical background, Kanaks, and just other population groups that you have, as you mentioned. They are from the regions.
It's a mixed population.
It's a mixed population.
So is the trouble ethnic? Are ethnicities turning on each other?
Well, it's not a significant factor, but it's more reflected in the voting power that these different groups have, and the relative change into their electoral way to assuage the demands.
Take a step back. Electoral weight, all of that, those are big words. What is the problem? Let's say, do you have first past the post system, or do you have a percentage of the legislature reserved for a certain ethnicity? If you have the first past the post system and everyone buys into it, then everyone just votes and everything is fine. What exactly is the problem? Why are people so hot under the collar?
So the way for the local authorities and the local independent movements led by the Kanaks in the 1980s, and on the other hand, the French government, to resolve the crisis at the time, the demand for more autonomy and independence, was to find a political consensus that was based on the process. And from that process, eventually over time, 20 years, the New Caledonia would gain further, would move toward independence, toward more autonomy independence. And that ended the political crisis. At the time, in 1988, there are two agreements that were signed. The Matignon Accord in 1988 that granted more autonomy already then at the time, and set the stage for another round of accord, which were in 1998, which further defined the path towards self-determination, as they call it. As part of these agreements was 3 referendums were scheduled to have their population of the island decide whether they will stay with France or not. And the 3 referendum happened. They took place, and by a thin margin, those in favor of remaining with France won. But the final referendum, in 2021 was during COVID, and the pro-independence groups, due to the COVID-19 impacts on their community, which have been largely more impacted than the other more urban and other communities, they boycotted the referendum. So the grievance at the time was that it wasn't a fair referendum. So that's already they boycotted the referendum.
And therefore they do not see the referendum as valid, and now they are probably clamoring for another referendum.
So there was already a grievance around that fairness of the referendum. But what triggered that particular crisis today is the proposal change in the voting law in the island by the French government. The French government, led by Emmanuel Macron, has suggested amendments to the electoral rules that would allow residents, including French residents, who have lived in New Caledonia for at least 10 years to vote in provincial elections.
Understood.
And the concern for the Kanak population is that it would dilute their vote. So the argument and those who support the reform argue that it's a question of fairness. If you live in the island, you invest in the island, you have children in the island, you pay taxes in the island, that must be one way. No taxation without representation here, right? And for the Kanaks, many in the Kanak community, that's a step back from the path toward their aspiration and the path towards something.
They think that demography is destiny, and by importing foreigners into the area and settling them, the French will eventually prevail.
In demography is an interesting question here, right? Because if you look at the latest numbers available from the French statistics, the Kanak population actually has increased in absolute number, but if you look at the more granular level, you see that it has actually fluctuated over the last 40 years, right? So it's not a certain predictable path toward a all-out majority in the island.
Immigration must have increased because now nickel is in demand, and nickel is one of the strategic metals. So there must be A, French executives coming in from France, and B, workers coming in from, say, Asia.
That's a good. Interestingly, the immigration actually has decreased in the last census. In part because of the nickel price fluctuations, and there has been a slower pace of investment into factories and capability around nickel in the island, so less jobs. So it is. On the surface, it seems, there is not really so much of a concern if you are a member of, the Kanak community. But if you look at the more in details, the share of the natives and the mixed population has increased. And it has increased at a higher rate than the increase in the overall Kanak population. And the other communities as well. So if you look at the longer term, there is a concern that in fact they will outpace the Kanaks. And since it's not
by natives, you mean the European population,
those who are born within the natives, the members of other communities than Kanaks and other than the European descent. So that third group, the other ethnic groups. Who have migrated for a long time, or other communities who have come over the years, they are outpacing in terms of their growth the Kanaks, and there have been a more steady growth of these groups. And of course, if you're a native, then you can make another Kanak. You can make claims, legitimate claims over more representation in your local politics and voting rights. But also, when you're a Métis, you're not necessarily belonging anymore to the Kanak community, and that, in the longer run, can become a reason for concern for the Kanaks.
So fundamentally, it's about power in the island. So quickly summarize the position of the French government and the position of those opposing the French government, and outline also the efforts at resolution.
Yes. So the French government argument is based on some of the insight about the demography and the change in the population makeup of the island. It's a question of fairness, right?
The French government argument is that those who live in New Caledonia must have the right to vote.
Right. And the other side, the pro-independence movements, see that as a dilution of their voting power and also a step back from the path toward autonomy or self-determination that the French government agree on, and they came up with those accords in the 1980s and 1990s.
So that is the clash. What are the efforts at resolution? Because apparently Emmanuel Macron flew to New Caledonia.
So Emmanuel Macron's official position is to foster dialogue. perhaps with the hope that a political agreement will ensue the same way it did in the 1980s, 1990s, and that's the intention of the French government, is to have that in political negotiations leading to, hopefully address both sides and settling the fight for now. And one way to do that would be to suspend the proposed change in the electoral laws.
Has the French government suspended the proposed change?
No, it has not.
So far, Macron is sticking to his guns.
He's so far sticking to his ground, and the population of the island is divided along those lines, right? You have the pro-independence parties.
They are sticking to their guns.
And the other side who are advocating for continued ties with France are also sticking to their guns, right? So if you look at the track record, it's very likely that we could have some form of political settlement. And there is no reason that we can see it will not be the case. Again, the French population in metropolitan France doesn't have a strong opinion about the crisis. It's sort of too far to care, exactly.
Let's examine what would be the question of France and its départements, as you like to call them, and what many call the continuation of the French Empire. France gets a lot of flack for continuing its financial empire in West Africa, even after it gave independence. Many argue that New Caledonia is a colony. France exploits it economically. So let's get into economics and tell us about the complicated relationship of New Caledonia with France.
And it's reflected in many other French overseas territories. You have these sort of hard rules where you can only import from the metropolitan France, and these.
How very 19th century. The French don't seem to change.
Indeed, and I was reading V.S. Naipaul, who described that very thing, where you have to buy.
One was a brilliant writer.
You even had to buy the rum from France, to tell you, and also the cost of the airfares if you want to go study in France is expensive. You have to fly across the world, and many in the island, whether they are pro or not pro or against independence, they see the Chinese cheaper goods, and they don't see a reason why they could not benefit from that, the benefits of globalizations and the markets that China offers. So that's definitely a concern. It has been a factor in France's relation with its overseas territories for a long time.
But it's more complicated, as you mentioned in our conversation, that yes, France may get economic benefits from New Caledonia, but it also gives all the residents and citizens, or let's say all the local population, healthcare. So France is certainly not just running an exploitative regime.
Right, and it is the irony of this type of relationship is, as we saw with French ex-colonies,
it's complicated.
It's complicated, but many of the leadership for independence actually were schooled in France.
But that was the case even for the leadership that demanded independence in India. Right. Gandhi was schooled in England. Nehru was schooled in England.
And you do have now an increasing share of youth from the Kanak community who are getting educated or sort of shifting from the tribal customary society. Of course, they can get an education anywhere. I'm not saying that as education versus non-education, but they are leaving in increasing number, they are leaving the traditional customary law system to go to more urban centers and to get educated. So that population becomes also more politically aware. And by sort of tapping into those resources and those connections that you mentioned that France has with this territory.
So they get infected by this idea of nationalism, which is a very European and a French idea, and therefore they want independence and sovereignty and yada yada.
Yes, they might spend some time at the Sorbonne and rub elbows with some professors from West Africa who have themselves been done the same for their countries at the time. But it is a factor. It is a factor that you have the younger population is shifting from the traditional
the more modern
to the more modern, and certainly tapping into the opportunities that France offers for education and coming back home with those ideas.
So they're importing the ideas of the French Revolution back to New Caledonia.
Exactly. Be careful what you wish for.
So economically, it's more complicated, and you've explained demography. Tell me, why is Macron so interested in New Caledonia, and why are the French still so committed to their Indo-Pacific départements, overseas territories, or colonies, whatever line of thinking and argument you want to take?
Macron and former presidents before him, they are very attached to France being a Pacific power. And if you start losing your ancrage, your anchors in your presence in the Pacific, well, you're going to have a harder time to claim a seat at the table. So it is.
My question is, why? Why?
Well, with the shift toward the East and the Pacific, it is a strategic value. Beside the economy that we mentioned in nickel, it is important for France to remain at the table in the Pacific, in the East.
So France still sees itself as la grande nation, as a global power, as a member of the Security Council in the United Nations, as a key driver of the EU, and therefore it wants to remain relevant not just in Europe, not just in Africa, but also in Asia and the Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to say that the French elite has not come to terms with the reduction of the French means and possessions and aspiration for what you mentioned, the grand vision, the empire, as to acknowledge the strategic value of the Pacific and Asia, and here there is sort of a realpolitik that you need to keep as much as possible your presence in the region, and New Caledonia is a piece on that chessboard.
Exactly, and the U.S. has its presence in Pacific. The U.S. has so many bases, and the French probably want to retain New Caledonia for geopolitical heft. It gives them more chips on the table, more pawns on the chessboard, and it has economic benefits as well now.
And in favor in support of Macron, you can also say that the Australia and New Zealand have, an interest in stability, so they will support a peaceful resolution, a political settlement of the situation. China doesn't seem to have an agenda there. It is,
But would China like an independent New Caledonia? Is that something that they are fomenting, encouraging, or supporting?
There are no evidence of this. I mean, New Caledonia is, you can say, for opening markets, but it's fairly small, as we say.
This is an isolated incident within the island or islands, and it's fundamentally a French problem.
And you have some allegations in the French media about the possible, speaking of foreign actors, of possible meddling of Azerbaijan, who, as a way to get back to France for its support of Armenia.
Azerbaijan is far away.
It is far away. It's very small, but it has created this group called Baku, the Baku group that support independence movements, and they've made a statement about New Caledonia. There is a view that it is a way to get back at the French, but it's unlikely that Azerbaijan will have a decisive role into this issue.
Brilliant. So we've covered New Caledonia. Thank you very much, Flavius, for your time. Anything you're missing?
No, I think thank you for the conversation. It is important to understand the demography. Demography is destiny. The Kanak population is increasing, but in relative terms, the natives from the island and the other communities, their growth rate is outpacing the Kanaks, and that is certainly playing a role into the anxiety and the concerns of the urgency of the Kanak populations as one factor behind the crisis and the unrest.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We'll see you at all.
Thank you.